And we're off. Welcome to Common Mansplaining. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back. Christian, welcome back. How's it going?
It's great. Great to be here.
Fantastic. All right. We got a fun one today. One of my favorites, right? And that is fiscal conservatism at its finest, right? Like the quintessential fiscal conservatism. And this is just something that like from the dawn of time has seemed to become an American debate, right? It's one of those things that just to frame it for you, our national debt right now is $37 trillion or something like that. Something outrageous, right? Showing an enormous lapse in just good fiscal policy, an enormous lapse in just like fiscal common sense, right? And people, we talked about it a little bit last time, like people might not think it's going to directly affect America, but it will. It may not affect it like it would a household finance, right? But it will definitely end up affecting America. We'll end up threatening our hegemony if we just don't learn to find some fiscal accountability here. And with our yearly revenue is like somewhere around 5 trillion, maybe a little bit more as of this year. That means our current debt is over 5 times what we. Can you imagine? Like I mean, I only put together
not 5 times the federal budget.
The federal budget,
not the GDP. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Correct. Not the GDP. Right. But yeah, five times what the United States expects to earn for the year. Which I mean, that's like that. Can you imagine if you were in debt like 5 times your salary? Like that's just it's mind blowing. And so, yeah. And so, of course, we want to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the pillars of fiscal conservatism. We're going to talk about Trump and Trump's fiscal policy and whether or not he meets the definition of fiscal conservatism. Hey, Jiminy, welcome aboard. And we're going to talk about some other things that are federal budget related, like the Fed, one of my least favorite bugaboos, like one of the people I would love to get rid of more than anything else. But yeah, so let's kick it off. So yeah, I want to start this by talking about the size of numbers, right? Because it's one of those things where when we get into this kind of topic, we'll start throwing around numbers like billion, trillion, and these numbers are just, the problem is they just don't hit from most people. Like they just don't land because people rarely encounter numbers of this sort in their daily lives, right? They just don't, it doesn't mean anything to them because I got to tell you a quick story, right? When I was young, I counted to 1 million, right? I'm one of the few idiots that were, I mean, I was very young. I was like 5 years old or something like that. But like nobody does something so stupid. I saw this little card. My parents gave me this little card that said, if you count to 1 million, one every second, you can count to 1 million in 12 days. I'm like, 12 days? No problem. I'll do that right now. Turns out you don't actually count, you go to sleep. You eat food. You don't count straight every second for 12 days. It took me more like a year, right? And so but that's just to let you know how big 1 million is. It takes you 12 days every second to get to 1 million. To count to 1 billion, it would take you about 32 years. 32, and to count to 1 trillion, you're talking about 32,000 years. I mean, these numbers are just so astronomical that people like sort of gloss over when you talk about it, because it's like, 1 million here, 1 trillion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money, right? Like it's like no big deal, right? Like pocket change. So I just want to like start off with that and just kind of like discuss when we think about it. If you guys have any questions about the just how big the numbers we're talking about, just to give you like an idea, we're literally adding roughly $6.6 billion to our national debt per day. Like it's just outrageous how much money we spend. It's like no big deal to people. Like I don't understand how it's.
Well, yeah, I mean numbers of scale. And this is part of the thing is the elites have tried to numb people to this by talking about it, right? Billion doesn't mean anything, and it's a nice succinct word. I don't know if you've ever sung a verse of bottles of beer on the wall.
Oh yeah, right,
Sing two verses of a billion bottles of beer on the wall, and you'll get a perspective. The first verse goes very nicely,
right,
right? A billion bottles of beer on the wall, right?
right,
Take one down, pass it around. 999,999,999 bottles of beer on the wall.
right,
999,999,999 bottles of beer on the wall. 999, right? And you see,
right,
like, right. So that gives you a little bit of scope, right? Billion.
right,
Right. So there is some selling, some propaganda, and people sort of get enamored to it. Now we are a very large country. It's 50
yeah,
states,
very,
right? And so our budget, this is the type of thing like when you're talking about a large population, 400 million now, and a lot of territory and things like the budget's not going to be small. But
right,
here's the thing: like for those who follow the channel, we've talked recently about social conservatism, or the culture wars, being socially liberal and socially conservative,
right,
and a lot more people are coming around to being socially conservative, especially fiscally conservative. And I think that's why a lot of people actually voted for Trump and left Biden. Right when the inflation got up, even minorities, Hispanics, African Americans who had not ever voted Republican started voting for Trump.
yep,
And the fiscal conservative was a big part of it. Now, you said, okay, and we'll talk about this here, Trump is not a true fiscal conservative, but he's closer than Biden and then the
definitely,
Democrats. And just moving
definitely,
that needle a little bit more to that makes a huge difference. And it's more common sense, and people were ready for that. Now, right, the classic thinkers of economic fiscal conservatism are Adam Smith, right?
yep,
The Wealth of Nations, laissez-faire, free markets create the most wealth, capitalism sort of unbound.
right,
And then John Maynard Keynes, his idea of that the government has to pump prime, but still to make the economy go in times of crisis,
right,
right? His saying, when we're not having a crisis, you need to cut spending, cut entitlements, and pay that money back. So now, right, those who followed us, we talked about, there's not really a crisis in America,
right,
right? People want to think that there is. There's some things we need to work on. Certainly, there was a
yep,
tragedy today.
yeah, so sad,
The shooting, and our thoughts and prayers go there. But
yep,
there's not really a crisis. We don't have a war. We're not having a pandemic, right?
right,
We're not having existential droughts, famines,
right,
natural disaster, widespread natural disasters. So this is the perfect time when we're not having a crisis for us to get back to common sense and to try to deal with this, and
exactly,
I think, so crisis is usually when you can say, well, this is a special circumstance, we're in a crisis, we can spend all this. But when we're
right,
not, you can't justify that. And so I think that's why it's so important to say there's no crisis going on right now. This is really business as usual, and we should be behaving fiscally
right.
like that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, and Jiminy said it. Yeah, like right, because we're spoiled, right? Right now that things are going relatively well, could be time to just just lay off the gas a little bit. I wanted to give a little bit of
Government spending. That's what I mean.
yeah,
Government spending to live. Yes, yeah.
yeah. I wanted to I wanted to give a little bit of a framework for people so people kind of understand our budget a little bit, our national budget, just in the broadest sense. I don't want to go deep into it because it's kind of boring stuff, the numbers, but just so people understand, like for example, last year our budget was somewhere in the neighborhood of like what was it 4.92 trillion, right? And we outspent it by like roughly $2 trillion, which is like almost 50%, right? So very, very poor efficiency. Now, 50 to 60%, 60% is really closer number of that budget is what people refer to as mandatory spending, right? And what that means is
Fixed
we're
cost. Yeah.
right, we're bound by law to spend this money. That's what it means. That's why they call it mandatory. And it usually, ironically, it usually encompasses the things that are least constitutionally mandatory, right? So it encompasses things like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, Obamacare, like all the stuff that are like we would usually refer to as entitlement programs, right? That's mandatory spending, with some other nonsense, right? So that's like the vast bulk of it, right? 60%. Another like 12 or 13% is national defense, right? So ironically, it's funny because you hear on the left, that like on the right, they want to get rid of entitlement. They don't even really want to do that anymore in Republican Party. But on the right, you'll more often hear a true fiscal conservative say, let's get rid of entitlement programs or at least curb them back or like, make some.
How about capping them?
Cap them, reform it in some way, right? Some austerity measure. On the left, they'll say, well, let's get rid of national defense. But I should point out immediately that, like, if you just use just quick math, the numbers, if I were to eliminate entitlement programs, all of a sudden we go from this huge deficit every year, 50% deficit, to like almost a 50% surplus, right? All of a sudden it makes all the numbers work. However, if I get rid of all of our, like, we don't spend a penny on national defense.
No pensions for veterans anymore.
No pensions for no personnel costs, no equipment, nothing, no maintenance, nothing. We do nothing with national defense at all. We're still in a heavy deficit. Like it does not. We could get rid of our entire. We could just give up on defense. We were like, anybody who wants to take over the country, go for it. Go for it.
You got a rusty nail on a board. We surrender.
Yeah, we give up.
The French.
Yeah, right. The French military plan, like all the tanks go in reverse. Right. We could do that, and it still wouldn't solve our financial problem. So, like, just to give you a basic understanding, then the last last 12 or 13% is what is called non-defense discretionary spending, which is like all of the rest of the stuff, like infrastructure, education, whatever, like agencies, stuff like that. Hey, Trump is winning. How you doing? Come on, welcome aboard. And so that's the bare bones, the most basic understanding of the budget, right? And I should point out that even in the non-discretionary, non-defense discretionary spending, veteran affairs, which is essentially another giant entitlement program, is still the vast portion, like the biggest single line item in non-defense discretionary spending, right? So it's like almost all of our money is going to like handouts essentially, right? And then the last significant portion I didn't mention is interest, right? We pay another good 12 or 13% just in interest payments to keep up this insane debt that we've got going on, right? So that's our budget in a nutshell. Just to give you guys a good frame of reference to when we go into this. So yeah, like the simple fix, right? If I were to just like wave the magic wand and be like, all right, we just get rid of entitlement I mean, it's obviously it's not that easy. We're not going to be able to ever do something like that realistically.
Well, yeah. I mean, draconian cuts are what the Democratic Party says we're going to do. That we're just going to cut things or cancel stuff, and you have to have a reasonable drawdown, right? And so that's why nobody believes, and the Republicans say, yeah, we're not going to do this, but we're just going to start cutting them and start drawing them down. We'll try to get rid of waste. Try to be more efficient. Maybe have caps say, hey, we have this entitlement, but when the budget for it runs out, maybe in August or September every year, then that's it. And we go without it till January, and the budget starts back up again, right? So certain sort of common sense caps like we would have in our budget. If you have a budget for something and it runs out, well, you do without until the end of the month, until you get more money, until whatever, right?
Right.
So what we'd like to see, though, I mean, what Trump is obviously, as a disruptor, has added some new things to this, right? So we came from an environment during the Biden administration of inflation, right? Inflation meaning like the cost of everything running wild, and then those costs pushing things, and so we had this kind of cycle, inflationary cycle that was really scary, and for a few years, and I think it was a big reason why people wanted to switch back. Now Trump immediately comes in and he starts talking about tariffs, which in layman's terms, that's raising prices on goods made in other countries sold here in America, depending on the country. depending on what could be negotiated. Now, there was a lot of hype in that, and then a lot of it didn't live up to the hype because he'd make deals with countries or things like that. But there are still some tariffs out there. He's still having that. That resulted in sort of a one-time price increase, but no runaway, not a cycle of inflation. Right. And so the Fed, or a lot of people were waiting to see what that happens. Trump has sort of proved that it's not a crisis. Right. It's not It's not a source of inflation. Whether you agree with the price hikes and the things, it's a principle he has. He thinks it has to do with our national security, just in general, our culture, that we should be able to manufacture things here, and have countries invest here, and for us to be able to trade freely other countries. The problem with that, even if a country takes down their tariffs against us, it's difficult for our exports because right now the dollar is so strong. I know a lot of people who are common don't really understand. The strong dollar sounds like good. Strong dollar makes it easier for us to buy foreign goods.
Yes.
Right. Makes foreign goods less expensive, but it makes our goods, right, because we need dollars back for them, more expensive in other countries and more difficult. So even with that, a little bit more fair playing ground, the strong dollar is still an obstacle for the trade deficit that Trump would like to have closed.
Right. Yeah. So let's before we dig into each of Trump's individual policies, let's talk about fiscal conservatism in a more broad sense, right? Like, we just want to go over some of the principles of fiscal conservatism, and then we'll kind of test those against Trump to see if, which ones he has and which ones he doesn't have. And because he does have, it's like you said, he's far closer to, a lot of people ask me, like why, if you're not really that crazy about Trump, why'd you vote for him? Like, because it's night and day difference from how close he is to he's definitely the lesser of two evils economically, right? Like, Kamala Harris was a nightmare. Like, literally, we would have maybe bankrupted the nation, like a literal disaster. So, all right. So these are the basic principles of fiscal conservatism, right? One is the concept of rights, right? Right to life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Pursuit of property is a big one, right? All right. And so unless there's an a priori commitment, like a contract, which one of those contracts for us, for a citizen, is the United States Constitution. Unless there's a contract that we already agree to, you can't compel someone else's labor. You can't force someone to pay for something that they don't agree to, unless they've already agreed to it as part of living in the place that they live in, right? That's the Constitution, right? But if I don't agree to it, if I haven't, if it's not part of the Constitution and I don't agree, you can't make me pay for somebody else. That's stealing or slavery, depending on how you do it and the way it comes out. And that's the big one, right? Like, honestly, the rest of this stuff could like fall by the wayside. But like, if you could just maintain that one principle, honestly, a lot of I would be happy with a lot of policies as long as they abided by that. Another big one is limitations to government, right? So like the 10th Amendment, you're going to hear me, if you watch this channel a lot, you hear me probably mention this. This is like one of my favorite amendment, essentially, or one of the many. Right. And it's one of the most neglected amendments, the 10th Amendment. You know what? I'm going to read it to you guys because it's just so succinct and so beautiful. All right. So here it is. The powers not delegated to the United States. Right. And then the powers delegated are enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. So if you want to look at those powers, that's where they are. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, right? So if it's not something else in the Constitution that says that the states can't do it, they are basically, all these powers are reserved to the states respectively, or the people, right? And so that's the 10th Amendment. And most people, like, when I say the 10th Amendment, if you're on the left, like, most of them have to ask me what I mean. Like, they don't even know what it is. They've either forgotten that it exists, and it honestly, at this point, it essentially doesn't exist due to some very bad Supreme Court cases.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's the principle, the conservative principle of what we call federalism. When conservatives like us talk about federalism, we mean let the states do this. This should not be something that's a national program or a federal government issue.
Right, right. Ron Letter, real quick. You said, what about the cabal? Which cabal are you talking about? There's so many to choose from. So yeah, so that's one of the big ones. Free trade. Free trade is a big pillar of fiscal conservatism, like, making sure that, people can trade as they deem appropriate. For the most part, conservatives are, kind of hands off when it comes to the market. They feel that the market regulates itself. And in a lot of ways, it does. I mean, in a lot of ways, there's no more. If it's like a giant calculator, like a giant supercomputer that calculates the price of everything, the demand, the supply, and like there really isn't anything else that we've ever created yet that calculates as well as the market just automatically does. Right. Another big one is like.
Well, hold on. Before we leave
Yeah,
markets, I want to talk about the principle of markets are those things when people trade honestly, your wealth is unbound, right? When we make a trade from distance and I deliver to you what I promised and you pay me what you promised to pay me, there is
right,
no limit to how that market can flourish, right?
right, right.
Problems
Yeah,
arise in markets, right? When people start corrupting it, start
yeah,
saying something but not delivering what we agreed upon, and then you say, well, and then I'm not going to give you what I agreed to pay you.
right.
People, so that fraud corrupts, right? All systems, governments, all
Yeah,
trust in systems. So a truly working free market system has to have this honest, and when there's that honesty,
right,
there's such prosperity. So
right,
we have allowed. Well, we want that. There are bad actors out there. There are people that will try to defraud people. So we expect there to be the government to provide some policing of markets, right, to
right,
stop outright fraud. We still believe in the caveat emptor, meaning the buyer beware, but we don't want people selling outright strychnine poison as a
right,
headache cure or something like that, right? So
right,
there are a few things, or if somebody sets up a fake market, takes money and delivers no goods. Um,
right,
we'd expect the government to try to prosecute those people for illegal activity. So
right.
we want free markets, but with a reasonable amount of policing, against fraud.
So yeah, Ron Letter, I'm not sure exactly what items you're referring to with regard to the cabal. So maybe enlighten me. I know some about the Vatican. I was raised Catholic, but there's always more to learn. So I'm open. So yeah, right. Like we do anticipate that the government will have to come in and enforce contracts, right?
Yeah,
We anticipate that this is like
of
there's a
course.
difference
Yeah.
between a conservative and like an anarchist or a libertarian, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's not like we feel like there's no such thing as taxes. It's not like we
Yeah.
feel like there's no such thing as like government,
Yeah.
in involvement. Obviously, we agree that governments
Yeah.
are a necessity. Um,
Yeah.
Another big one, of course, though, is a minimalist take to taxation and regulation, right? Like while the government, does need to, like we said, enforce contracts, make sure people aren't selling illegal goods, make sure people aren't cheating and gaming the system. They should do it as little as possible, right? With regard to conservatism. Property rights, we discussed, is a real big one. Now, historically, I should point out that conservatives are big about protecting property rights from the government, and liberals are more big about protecting property from other enterprises or from other like predatory individual parties, right? So that's the dichotomy there. Um, another so one other aspect that I wanted to discuss too about fiscal conservatism is kind of like Reaganomics, which is essentially like it for want of a more succinct system, it's kind of essentially what a true fiscal conservative today would claim as a valid economic model, right? And I want to correct a couple of myths about it too, right? So Reaganomics is essentially it was drafted by Art Laffer, right? And he's famous for the Laffer curve, which is basically a curve that shows that over if you tax too much, right, then
Your
obviously,
revenues, yeah.
right, right. If you tax so much that it gets to a point where businesses are like, well, if you're taxing that much, I can't make anything. Why would I even do business here? Why would I do business at all? It's just no, the climate for business gets worse and worse the more you tax, right? After a point, after a point. And so that's where the curve comes in. And right, and obviously to a point, if you tax a little bit, like if you're taxing almost nothing, then you're just not making any money for the government. You're just spinning your wheels, right? So that's kind of how Reaganomics was modeled after. Now, one of the things that people will say when they talk about Reaganomics is they'll say trickle down theory, right? And trickle down theory, just so that everybody understands, is not really what conservatives would call Reaganomics. It's what Democrats or liberals would use as a slur to misbrand Reaganomics, right? Because Reaganomics was never supposed to be like let's say you tax somebody less, right, and they make more money. That was never supposed to be where like they immediately turn around and give that money to their entry level employees. That was never supposed to happen. And it always amazes me how the liberals will say, like, kind of assume that that's how it was supposed to work. No, what happens though, if it does trickle down at all, it trickles down wide, not tall, right? So like it's not like they immediately turn around and pay the next person who pays the next person. What they do is they expand their business and hire more people, right?
Yeah.
And still wage growth there, and during Reagan's years, which were an economic boon, by the way, like it was a huge boom cycle, mostly because we finally dropped those ridiculous like post-war taxes.
Yeah. The marginal I have no meaningful memories of the Carter administration, even though I lived during then. But we've lived under economics in the modern era, right? Because we don't appreciate that marginal tax rates were as high as 90%, right? On individuals, things like that, to a certain point, like the government was taking so much, and by Reagan dropping those down to like 35%, which, um, increased wealth so much that the government earned more revenues, had more tax revenues, even though their tax rates were lower, right? And so it's counterintuitive. And on principle, Obama defied that, was the first one who really went against that, right? Clinton, and obviously George Bush and the Bushes were on board with the Clinton policy. Obama was like, even if our revenues went down on principle, I want to raise taxes on these individuals because I just feel like on principle they should have higher taxes, even if there's less money for the government, right? So he was the first person to really make that break. Obviously, Trump went back on that, but yeah, Biden was fully on board. He didn't care about again, Biden and Harris didn't care about the effects on revenues. It was these people we feel like need to be taxed, or these institutions or whatever. The tax rates just need to be higher.
Right. Yeah. Like it's like, yeah, you talk to a modern day liberal and it's or progressive, and it's like it's not even like they're not even taxing for any like concrete reason other than it's almost like a punishment. It's like these people are rich, we don't want them to be rich, therefore bad, right? Like let's take more money away from them. And it's like, come on, guys.
Coveting is the worst attribute of a majority, right? And that's really what our Constitution, but not really by being a republic, not being a true democracy, is to protect the wealthy from poor, just saying we want your stuff and being able to take it.
Right. Yeah. Instead of it being two wolves deciding, with the sheep who gets to, eat dinner that night, I mean, right. So like that's fiscal conservatism in a nutshell. Right. And that's like the metrics. Those are the metrics by which we will judge Trump in a moment going forward. Right. And so yeah, let's talk about Trump. Let's talk about Trumpanomics, which is a phrase that I hadn't heard until today, ironically, which is, I guess it's something Christian brought for. Hey, Kat, how's it going?
My daughter has decided to chime in today.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. Great. So yeah, Trumpanomics. So yeah, Christian, why don't you detail for us some of the typical Trump economic?
I've been more defensive of Trump's economic policies. And so Trumpanomics really have 4 pillars to them.
Yep.
And 3 of them Eddie agrees with and would be more conservative, certainly more than the Democratic Party. One of them is a cut in lower taxes.
Yep.
Cut taxes, that the government should have lower tax rates, right? The second one is that we should really lessen the regulation on markets. There should be lower regulation, less red tape, common sense things. So it's easier to start businesses, including high capital ones like oil refineries, nuclear power plants, things like that. Factories that require a lot of startup costs. Cutting taxes and things makes it a lot more feasible for those industries that require a lot of capital investment to start to get up and going.
Right.
His third one is he wants energy independence.
Yes.
Right. Drill, baby, drill is an important part of by having being energy dominant, being able to make money from energy, but energy independent, not being able to be manipulated by the Middle East is inflamed. We can't drive our cars now. Right. That kind of stuff doesn't work for an economy like America. So he believes in energy dominance, independence. His last one is what we were talking about. He's not a free trader.
No.
He wants fair trade. Yeah. And this is a principle for him, even if it leads to, he thinks even if it leads to bad consequences in the short term, he strongly believes the long-term effects are better for America. So meaning, and he does that with tariffs, that countries that tariff our products, that if I try to sell, say these headphones that I made here in America, in Europe, just the simple fact that they were made in America would mean they have a markup that I have to pay to their government of, certain 25-30%. But if their goods are sold here, there was no tariff at all. So it was an unequal thing. It was the thing that they were definitely benefiting by having access to the American market. Right? We have the most wealth to spend. Most broadly best. Our consumerism is something that everybody wants to sell here.
Right.
But they were taking advantage, right? What we've said in so many areas is like something that's good, like free markets or like welcoming immigrants. If it's taken to an extreme or beyond where people are gaming the system, and now you see the gaps get so big, you have to kind of pump the brakes and say, look, let's bring it back to common sense. So the trade deficit was, over trillions of dollars. He said, hey, let's try to bring that back, right? Where if you want to sell in America, you're going to have to, but you're tariffing our goods, we're going to have the same thing. So he wants fair trade. He's fine with making the American market more expensive if that feels like that other countries, rather than manufacturing or making goods elsewhere, will actually build a factory here in America and make the goods so they can get around that. He thinks long-term security-wise, that principle is good because we'll have the ability to make manufacturing like microchips, semiconductors, medicines, things like that. We're not, if we get in a event like the pandemic or like a global war, we'll be able to still produce essentials that we need for our country to function and not be, bent over a barrel.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, right. As far as his, being protectionist about, like some of the key items that, woe to us if we're like, we get into a war and it's like all of a sudden, we're in a war with China and China's like, well, now we're not going to sell you any more superconductors because, we've got control of Taiwan. And we're like, all right, well, I guess none of our stuff is going to work anymore. No more phones, no more GPS, no more missile, no more satellites,
nothing new. Yeah.
Right. It'd be over. Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely some value to that. And I like that he is trying to reshore jobs, right? That's a big part of his, to a lesser extent, although I wouldn't call this like a Trumpanomic pillar, so to speak, but like his immigration hardline stances kind of have like the side effect of like protecting domestic jobs and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, it's all kind of part of his economic, it's weird because Trump in a way, although he does foreign policy, it's like almost always for an economic, like fit, like a domestic policy reason, right? So it's like it's almost like he's entirely a domestic policy president in a weird kind of way.
It's kind of like
Yeah,
he wants to make America
right.
put America first, or make
Yeah,
make
like
it
Great again. Yeah.
great. It's almost like that, right? Yeah, and
right.
right. So there's obviously some good and another great thing that I like about Trump, right? One of the things I loved about Trump, right, was Doge. Doge
Mhm.
to me was at least in concept a phenomenal idea. Like to get rid of all the extra bureaucracies, to like, cut down on
Ways,
wage fraud and corruption, like
right?
that
The
seems like
NGOs that were just like Stacey
right.
Abrams NGO. Yeah, we don't need to send them any more money.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, that seems to me like a no-brainer, right? Like, that's just like you would think that everyone would be on board with that, but apparently it was a bigger problem. And now, where Trump is not conservative is, of course, like as we mentioned, he's not out for free trade. He's for fair trade, or yeah. But I mean, to an extent, I understand. Like, I mean, if you and I went out and we just went out trading in magic cards, right? And like, somebody like started looking up a site and like they're pricing their cards, but they're like marking each one up 25%. Like you'd have to too. Like you can't just take it on the back end, but not get it on the, you have to, it has to go both ways. I mean, and that's understandable.
Well, for
Where
a
I
long
think,
time, so in the 20th century, right, we were rebuilding, right, establishing our hegemony, rebuilding destroyed Europe.
right,
Asia was in a state of repair, and so we allowed them to sort of take advantage of our markets, right, on principle. But that crisis is over, right? The
right,
justifications for that, and just because we did it that way for a long time doesn't mean that we don't need to, right? This is why the disruptors to reevaluate it. Okay, we did that for a while. The reasons we did that, those reasons don't exist anymore. We can stop that. And when he did that with Canada, especially, right, that we cut back saying, all right, Canada, we've got to have fair trade between us, or we're right. And Trudeau resigned because of it, because like Canada can't function as a government, can function as an economy if we have fair trade, right?
right,
So and Trump is like, well, I'm sorry, that's not my problem,
right.
right?
It's your
If
country,
you
not
can
mine.
become a part of America, if you can't function as a country anymore, right? Offer them that
Right.
option.
Right. Now, of course, yeah, America is very, very, very fortunate in that, a lot of nations do have to trade, right? Like they concentrate on one or two industries, like fishing or farming or whatever, and then or mining, and they have to depend
Watches,
on
cuckoo
that.
clocks. Yeah.
Right. They have to depend on their surplus there to, go to the world market and then trade for the other stuff that they need that they have a deficiency in. America isn't like that. We're maybe the only nation on earth that could truly produce every single thing we need right here. And that's
Yeah.
that's an amazing advantage, right, on the world stage, right? Like what Jiminy was talking about, it's a lot of people don't understand why it would be, reasonable to just have a fair exchange. And yeah, it's amazing that a lot of that's just like Trump knee jerk, right? Like they just Trump derangement
Oh yeah.
syndrome, they call it, right? Like so if Trump does it, all of a sudden it's bad, even if it makes perfect sense, sometimes, right? Like
We
Doge.
don't want to mine rare earths here because it's really destructive. The Greens here don't like the sight of mines. Let mines happen in Western China or Kazakhstan, or so
Right.
we don't have to see them. But
Yeah. Now
yeah, it's privilege.
Now, where Trump, and this is my biggest qualm with Trump, right? Where Trump is not very fiscally conservative, right? And if you like go back to the household finance example, which again I understand it doesn't translate perfectly to government finance or to macroeconomics, but if I'm taking in money and I'm spending money, I want to spend less than I make, right? Like it's just that simple, right? If I'm making $35,000 a year, I preferably want to spend $34,000 a year or less, right? The more I save, the better in a household finance setting. Now, there are times where, hey, Janet, how you doing? Welcome aboard. There are times where, of course, you want to take on some debt to leverage your assets, even in a household finance. But Trump is not thrifty at all. Like he does this thing where he cuts the taxes, right? He cuts the money he takes in, which I'm for. I'm for cutting taxes. But there's no accompanied drop in expenses, right? In fact, it goes the other direction. He actually spends more than he was before while making less. It's like if you went to your boss, it's like let's say you're making $40,000 a year, you went to your boss, you're like, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a bigger house, but I want you to drop my salary down to 35,000. It's like it just doesn't make any sense, right? So this is where I have the problem with the way Trump operates fiscally. Now, I will give him a caveat. Now, the caveat is Trump has a very different understanding of how he uses America as a business. Like he uses he thinks about our natural resources as like untapped assets, and he's just trying to give businesses the opportunity to tap them, which should create, wage growth and should create expansion, which it has, but just not anywhere near in the proportion that he's dropped. The delta has increased between how much he makes and how much he spends. So,
all right. So,
what are your thoughts?
For me to come and mansplain a little bit here, not all spending is the same. There's a difference between just spending and investing, right?
Right.
And this is type of thing. So, a lot of what we talk these mandatory spending that we talked about earlier in the program is just spending. It goes out. It has nothing to do with investment, right? Trump has been willing, right? He hasn't been as aggressive in cutting the budget. There was some talk when Doge and Elon Musk was around about trying to get to a balanced budget. He's not trying to do that now. But he is seeing areas where he feels like spending the money is an investment.
Yeah, right? I told you he wouldn't.
What?
I told you he wouldn't. I told you I was going to go by the wayside. I knew it.
Well, I want to talk about one of his more interesting things that is quite controversial. So Intel has they're our big chip maker, domestic chip maker, has had a big hit in their profitability. NVIDIA is blowing up, but Intel's been going down.
Right.
And so rather than give them a bailout like Obama did to GM or whatever and just grant money, he's given them money, but now the United States government owns 10% of Intel.
Very interesting. Now,
right? So it's sort of like an investment. Now, this isn't a new idea. Sweden has done this. The Nordic countries that Bernie Sanders talks about have this a lot of time where the best companies that are doing the best, the government will own a part of them to help them get even better. And not tax them as heavily, kind of things like that. But it's interesting. We're going to spend this money for you, but we're going to have some ownership. We're going to get something out of it, right? Yeah. So that's an interesting sort of thing. If we're going to give you money, we want something back out of it. We'll see the long-term effects of that, and whether future presidents just sell the stock and move on. This is the part of the thing too, because we have term limits. Because our 4-year window, our economic cycles are a lot longer. Like in Asian cultures, Japan and China, they have a 5-year economic plan, a 10-year economic plan, a 25-year economic plan, a 100-year economic plan, right? Their forward thinking is, right? That's why they save, their cultures save a lot, but they also plan, for well beyond their lifetimes. In politics here in America, it's like, well, that's not my problem. In 4 years, I'm going to be golfing. That's the next guy's problem. Right. And so there's been these perverse incentives to, I want to spend now so I get credit, so I have good times when I'm in office, so people look back on my legacy and see, oh yeah, he built this and this, and everybody was happy, and that it'll finally hit the Eddie Palantonio presidency when he's like, all right, the good times are over, we're paying this stuff back, and the history books will say, this guy, this is the president everybody hated.
Right. Yeah.
We haven't had somebody brave enough to do that yet. Trump as he wants to be seen as a fixer of problems, right? A doer of deeds, not just a cutter of spending,
Right.
and an austere accountant. He wants to see how Trump did this, and that takes action. But he's trying to think of it as, I'm investing. This is going to make America greater because of this, the long-term effects. And so investing is not the same as the spending when you cut it into like Social Security, like the other entitlements. And
Sure.
so that's the type of thing that I think expenses and investments are different.
Now let me I'll push back a little bit in that
Sure.
what while I don't necessarily agree for principled reasons, but not for practical reasons, I kind of I have to acknowledge the practicality of the left leaning stance in that a lot of the expenses, like the mandatory spending, like a lot of the entitlement programs, are what economists would refer to as an economic multiplier, right? So it is a type of investment, right? It's like they put the money in the hands of consumers who in theory would then put the money back into circulation, who would in theory then create, and a lot of times that money can cycle 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times, depending on how it's how who they're giving it to and how that group's spending habits are. Now,
Sure.
right, again, I don't agree with that model.
Well, that's John Maynard Keynes, and he says you do that and you make the entitlements big when there's a crisis, when there's a war, when there's a depression or low growth period, right? What we've talked about is, right, so those entitlements have raised and become very generous when there were hard times,
right?
But nobody has the will, wants to be the guy to say, okay, now we're not in a crisis anymore. We need to just bring those back to where they were before the crisis.
Right.
Even that common sense level, right, is what we haven't seen. But yes, when things are bad, we need to get this people out to people and invest and let it multiply. But we don't need that investment right now, right?
Right.
That's the type of thing we need. Government spending. Biden's Inflation Reduction Act was one of the worst pieces of legislation because the government spending drove inflation, right?
Sure.
It's not what we needed.
Of course. And you're right. And like I said, yeah, I'm in principle against Keynesian economics in any case, right? Like most of it is I don't make the claim that it doesn't work. I just make the claim that we ought to
nobody is a true Keynesian because they don't want to do the second part of his
right. Yeah, very few.
Right, the Democrats are saying they're all for pump priming, but they're not for recognizing that the crisis is over and taking away the primer.
Right, it's the same thing. There's a lot of that. There's like a lot of taboos in fiscal policy. Like, for example, they don't, we could build it. Like, for example, okay, a good perfect example is like, right, last year our budget was like $5 trillion. We ended up spending $7 trillion, and a lot of what we spent extra was unforeseen, right? Like a lot of it came from COVID expenses and stuff like that, like inflation, like disasters, things that we could build in a cushion for. But we don't, because of a lot of like weird like, for example, one thing, there's the way our policies, our laws work. If you there's like a limit to how much you can budget for, but there's a no limit to how much you can spend for a natural disaster, right? You can just like, whoa, let's just spend whatever we want. So like of course that encourages keeping the budget part tight. But then when you get to the part where you're discretionarily like just dealing out money, you just do whatever you want, right? So like, because it looks better on paper. If you put it on paper that you've built in a cushion, it's like, it looks wasteful, even though you're going to waste that money either way. History has proven this. There's like a lot of little like taboos like that, right?
Well, this is the problem with the federal government doing stuff like that. If you give them a budget, they're terrified of coming in under budget.
Right.
Because then the budget will be cut. And so they're always going to spend that. That's how you get the $600 hammers, is because it was the time was running out and they had to spend this money. Right. So now this type of thing we need to disincentivize. These are the things where we're incentivizing the government federal government, and this is reducing the bureaucracy. having better technology where we can track budgets and things like that. But it's also, right, our last program where we talked about crisis. It's helping people identify this is not a crisis where we need to give up rights or we need to spend in deficit.
Yeah.
And because that's always been the justification for it. And what they use now is the threats like, oh, if people don't have that money, there'll be social unrest or something. They're basically trying to threaten riots if we cut back food stamps 50%.
Yeah,
right?
well, and they might, who knows? It's very difficult to know because we just never do it, right? Like we have no idea what the actual effects are of actually cutting like I don't know what would happen truly. Like if we cut Social Security tomorrow, I don't know what would happen, right? I think ultimately everybody would just like whine about it, honestly, and that would be basically it. But there's no telling, right? Like who knows? Who knows how many people are depending on that money? Who knows what the actual effects would be, long term?
I would say it affect my life.
Yeah.
My
Social
roommate's on
Security?
Social Security.
Yeah, her roommate's on social disability,
Yeah.
Social
Oh,
Security.
right.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, I mean, I
know,
got friends
so
that, I mean, it's one of those things where, this is one of the classic leftist accusations is that, like, if you want to cut back on entitlement programs for any reason, right? For austerity, for principled reasons, for whatever, like because it's a violation of the 10th Amendment, any cut on entitlement programs at all means that you're heartless, that you just don't care, you want to push granny off a cliff or whatever. And the problem with that is that conservatives are more generous with their charity than the left, right? That's just proven stat. So for anybody who says that, ask them to explain to you why we give more in charity. If we're that heartless, if we don't want to give of ourselves, why do we, right? Apparently we do. It's not about being heartless. It's about some policies are better for America, others are not.
And it's people can be generous but still feel like disagree about the role of the government doing
Right,
things.
right.
Right.
So that's
that's
something I wanted to. One thing I wanted to mention as a pillar of fiscal conservatism too, that's really important, is the more local the government action, the better, right? Because you're always going to have more in common as far as interests are concerned, as far as demographics are concerned, as far as everything.
Administration,
Right. Like everything is going to be more in sync the more local you are. And the 10th Amendment is just a perfect reflection of that. It's saying that you should defer to local governments first if possible. And if possible, not even government, right? Like the best case scenario to cure all these problems that the left wants to cure, the best case scenario is that people do it, that businesses do it, that local churches do it, the charities do it. There's a million different answers for this. The problem is all of those answers have become disincentivized because they're already paying the government to do it. And that's the big problem, right? Like if you get to the point where, right, imagine how much charity conservatives would give if we didn't also have to pay 40% of our income to the government, right? Like we'd have all that extra money to give away. And I'm not saying that we would give it all away. I'd certainly love an extra 10% in pocket, and I'd, give out an extra 10%. If I could save 20%, I'd definitely split it, like I'd be happy to. I give it to charity all the time. But yeah, so that's
I guess I just have a slightly different perspective as somebody who lives with somebody who has disability. Like, I guess it's like, well, it's like it's a kind of complicated thing because on the one hand, right, like there is a degree of like how like if private people are handing out money and stuff, right, or charity, right, that gives sort of less agency. Where the thing with my roommate is there's just certain mental health things that make her hard to have it makes it hard for her to have a job. And it's like physical things too, right? So like there's a reason why she's on it, right? And like on a technical basis, like people out of the kindness of their heart could support her. But like, how many people would actually do that? Right. And how much would she be under like the whims of like somebody else? So like that's something that I'm sort of like, if that was just like taken away tomorrow, like that's a concern. But the other thing is like disability and Social Security is not a lot. Okay. I know how much that it is. It's not anything. It's very small.
This is why we'd have people. She would live with family, right? She wouldn't be able to live independently, and so there's certain things that we're accustomed to and that we value that would have to be an adjustment on there. But there will come a time if the government gets where there's extreme austerity, where it costs us 30, if interest rates get high enough, it costs us so much money to borrow money that we just have to cut back. Like, people are going to have to do hard things. Like, look, sorry, we would love to do this. We'd love to give you this money. We just can't afford to right now.
Right.
You know,
And
it's how we are in personal things. There's lots of things I would like to do for my daughter and for my family, but I don't have the means to. When I have the means, then I do it. Right. When I don't, I'm sorry, you know.
I'd
So
love to
just
go
looking at
out and try
Jimmy's comment, right?
Oh,
And it's actually kind of interesting because she moved up here to North Carolina to be with me, and she used to be in a place where the community was like not super great, and that she was basically on her own. And then she moved up here with me, and even like with the Social Security, sort of the agreement is that I take care of her a bit more, and that's fine for me, right? And that the people in this local community are more supportive. So yes, I do agree with that. That would help things out. It's just the problem is that we as Americans are not there at all right now.
A couple of things to understand. Number one, and I'm gonna spit a stat at you, and you know, just think about it. Right now, even with the government already assuming the responsibility of taking a lot of people's money and redistributing it, like to Social Security, Medicare, we already, even currently, give roughly $500 billion a year to charity. Roughly. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Now, I'm not saying it would cover like all of the homelessness or all of the, you know, whatever needs or medical care or whatever in the world. It certainly wouldn't. But it's a lot of money. Imagine how much it would be if we didn't have to already pay the government for it. But the bigger challenge is this, right? If Americans, ultimately, you're right. There may come a time where someone is in need and asks for help from the community or family or friends or everybody who, you know, that they can think of. And eventually nobody, you know, she's got her hand, turns out nobody's able to help, or nobody chooses to help, right? Or they all look after other concerns or something like that. And that does happen in life. And the truth is, as sad as it is, I would want everyone to help. I would personally help, but I would never force someone to. I would never make someone else do, right? Because again, it's like, what if a farmer needed help on his field? Would you make someone else work there? That's called slavery. What if, you know, your friend needs help getting food tomorrow? Would you go rob someone else to do it?
No.
The problem is you can never force that kind of assistance. If they can agree to it, that's you know, I agree. Yeah, Christian would agree. I would agree. I've never turned somebody. I literally every time I see somebody out at the, you know, grocery store, you know, begging, I always go get them food. Every time I see somebody on the corner, when I have the opportunity, I help them out. But I would never make somebody do it. You know, it's one of those. It's a very difficult. And
it's one of the things. Yeah, I don't think anybody's talking about like getting rid of Social Security. That's the fear the Democrats say. But if we just start capping things or just start reducing things a little gradually, because hey, we'd love to do this. We can't afford to right now. We've got so much debt. If we can get this under control. Now, one of the things, right, Trump has shown, hey, I got the border under control. Let's have a few years of no illegal immigration, and we get through that backlog of the 4 million cases of backlogged immigration. See where we're at. Maybe we make some changes, right? This is the type of thing. If we make some changes now, and then let's see where we are. Like how this investment in Intel and this thing to try to bring back domestic production, that's not going to bear fruit for a while. It's going to take 3 years, maybe even the next president, to see whether whether we need to continue on that road exactly or make some changes. Is it a slight steer to the left, to the right? But yes, in general, what I would say for Morgan's situation, if a government is going to provide assistance to people like my daughter's roommate, it's better that it comes not from the federal government,
Yes.
but from a state or from a local
I can understand.
government. So she maybe it doesn't have to go to local charities, but that they can see the need in their area. They can administer it more effectively, and if there's less need, right? If they actually start doing this and helps out, there's not as much need, there's not as much homelessness. They can reduce their budget temporarily. It's not the end of the world. Then there's more need. They can raise their budget, right? Yeah. Federal bureaucracies, right, that handle all 50 states, right, very quickly realize, all right, there's needs in some states, but not as much in others. And then they quickly just focus on, we need to keep our jobs.
Yep.
We need to keep our jobs. And so helping out becomes less important. But if you get down to a local level, the help of the individual, I feel like, is more of a concern than when there's a big government bureaucracy, because they're more likely to actually interact with somebody locally than certainly a Washington bureaucrat.
Not only that, there are for people that do want to collectivize wealth. Sorry, I didn't miss.
No, go on.
I mean, for people that want to collectivize wealth and people want to get pool their resources, there are communes that do that. There's people, there's communities out there, and I always encourage, there's a lot of people on the left, for example, that want this style of economic model. I'm like, good, do it. The good news is that you can, if the federal government does it and somebody wants to not do it, it's impossible. But if you flip it around and the federal government doesn't do it, but somebody at the local level wants to, then you can do it anytime you want, right? Yeah. So the more local you get, then if you need assistance, live in a community that there's plenty of communities that do it.
Yeah, some in Durham, yeah.
But not to say that all of them are great, but you'd have to pick it selectively, right? But and the other thing too is so the Constitution is one of our a priori agreements that I discussed earlier, and it's there's some agreements in there that we have to adhere to, that we have to accept as part of living in America, right? So you want to minimize that list of agreements because it's hard to move countries, right? If my list of agreements from Durham or Cary are too restrictive, it's not that hard for me to just move to Raleigh or to Apex or something. I could just move to a slightly different community in essentially the same place, keep my job, keep all that stuff. But it's hard for me just to move to Mexico if I don't if I don't agree to something. That's another reason.
Become a citizen to do it legitimately.
Right. All right. Real quick, I want to touch on this briefly because I do want to tell everybody how much I hate the Federal Reserve. Just so people understand that the Federal Reserve is a group of unelected bureaucrats who have massive economic power, incredible economic power, not only domestically, but even worldwide. They literally control the
arbitrary.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I mean, completely unaccountable. No one can, aside from following laws, regulations, some of which they set, right? And nobody votes for these people. And they can create inflation anytime they want. They can create deflation anytime they want. They can affect employment. They can even literally manage the way the government spends and borrows its money. It's insane how much power these people have. And what blows my mind is the very thing that they were created to fix, to solve as a problem, is something that they have personally caused more times than I can count. They were basically created to stop something like the Great Depression, and then 15 years later immediately caused it. I'm flabbergasted why this thing is still in existence. It drives me nuts. They caused the 2008 market crash. They do this boom and bust cycle thing all the time, and they were supposed to be the very body that saves us against it. Drives me nuts.
Combinations.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's that.
Yeah. There are conspiracies. Conspiracies do exist. Right, and they do act in their own. We would expect the Fed to act in their own self-interest, and they do.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
That's the type of thing is with their name and it's painted. They try to propagandize that they're serving a greater need. Now, true, we have not had a Great Depression since the one in the 20s, right?
Right.
But that's the type of thing. When there used to be actually lots of cycles of depression and boom in the 19th century. That coming out of the Great Depression was the last depression. We've had recessions, but it has been since the post-World War a steady growth of the economy and the GDP, and that's been the best. That's been the thing that has allowed the Fed to stick around, that track record. But yes, they're human. We can't trust them. Like, they're not infallible. They're not a deity. They're not prescient, right? And they're capable of making mistakes, and they're capable of being petty, of being motivated, right? Right now, our interest rates, right, 4.5% to 5% interest rates are 5 times what Japan, Switzerland, other European countries, right, have real low interest rates, and we don't have the inflation that they said Trump's tariffs were going to cause. Nope. And it's time. What we know is Powell is starting to see that he's going to have to lower interest rates. How much he does? Hopefully, it's 0.5%, but it'll at least be 0.25%. Right?
I mean, too late.
See. Yeah.
Too late, pal. I mean, what drives me crazy about, one thing I will say about Trump is that he's right an awful lot when it comes to economics. I mean, I'm not an economist. I took a couple of classes in college, and I understand it relatively well for a layman, like for someone who isn't an economist. But that's because I was a personal financial consultant. But I'm not an economist. But constantly I see people, even like seasoned economists, like skilled experts, say, oh, Trump is going to lead us to recession, or tariffs are going to cause blah, 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 blah. And then, like, time and time again, they have to go back and say, well, I guess it didn't really do that, but now it's going to do this. And then that comes along and it's like, well, okay, so I guess it didn't cause this problem either. But, it's like it's a constant moving target with them.
And I think what I think Trump understands better than you and I do is finance at the level of the elite.
Yes.
Right. And what we talked about earlier, Kat wasn't here for this, but we talked about how billions and trillions have lost all meaning to the common man. Yeah. We cannot appreciate that. Trump can. Right? Mm-hmm. He's operated in that world, and I think he gets it. Right?
He's got practical knowledge.
He is an elite. He resents the elites when they're, for their abuse, but he understands the abuse of power, how much power they have, right? And how it's being abused, and the benefit that it could have, how much benefit it could happen at the elite level and at the common man level if they relaxed these interest rates, if they did different things. That he feels like they're being manipulated by the deep state, by Democrats that just are anti-Trump, that just don't want it, right? And Bill Maher put words to this. This was a big part of the left during the 2019-2020 election cycle. He actually openly hoped that the economy would get worse so that Trump would lose the election, right?
Right.
He wished bad things upon the United States, right, to his everlasting detriment. And anybody that agreed, right, said, I would love for this country's economy to tank if it meant I didn't have to deal with Trump as the president, right? Right.
Insane.
Those people are being punished right now, and Trump, right? He's not doing this simply for pettiness. He's doing this because this will be a legacy, right? Mm-hmm. But we need to change a lot of those bad actions that were in the past, be it in policing, be it in fiscal policy, social policy. And this is a disruption. Just because we did it this way for a long time doesn't mean we need to keep doing it that way. And the Fed, and if he can, it would be a big success for him if he can make the Fed accountable to the president, right?
Yep.
And they become semi-elected officials if the president has to notify the Fed.
They need to be disbanded and become a part of the cabinet, in my opinion. I don't understand why they don't report to the treasurer. I don't understand that. I don't understand why they have any independence from the government at all. We rely on them for governmental action. I mean, it's fundamentally governmental act. Anyway, it is interesting what Trump's doing as far as the investment. I've said a long time that the government should invest. I'm not sure how I feel about the conflict of interest involved because
me too. Me too. We'll see how it happens. I don't, we'll see if it becomes a trend or this is a pilot program type of thing. But we'll see.
What I worry about is like if I'm a small business owner, right? I depend sometimes on big businesses going out of business so that I can have a come up and I can be the next big business, right? Sometimes you need the throne to be vacated so that you can, but if we have this, effective policy of never letting the giant structures fail, then I don't know. But at least he's taking a new tack, which I'm happy about. Let's try something new. But yeah. All right. But anyway, guys, that's all we have for you. Thanks. Great show today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Jiminy, thanks so much for your engagement. And we appreciate you guys watching every Saturday, every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Catch us next time. Common Mansplaining.
Keep it coming.
Bye.